What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Favale, coming at you solo this time to talk a little bit about Giannis Antetokounmpo, who is in the news again, not because of anything he said, but because of a report from CBS Sports' Bill Ryder about his future, or other people speculating about his future. So yes, we're going to get into trades. Sorry to ruin anybody's day who doesn't want to talk trades just yet. We're also going to get into the reality of what Giannis and the Milwaukee Bucks are doing. Before we do so, though, you know what you're going to do? You're going to hit subscribe, turn on post notifications on YouTube, comment, like, help Iago love us back. We appreciate all the support. And also subscribe across Apple and Spotify if you're listening to the audio version of this and have not done so already. Even if you don't use those, subscribe anyway. Thank you. So let's start here with the snippets that are making the rounds from Bill Ryder's report. He quoted, I think there are three different executives, and one says this is a Western Conference team executive. Teams are circling and hopeful. Another top executive of a team that could be in the mix said, I wouldn't be surprised if a trade happened by the trade deadline. And finally, he cites an Eastern Conference NBA exec who has already heard that the places believed to be Giannis's would-be preferred destinations, quote, the teams I've heard are Miami and New York, the Nets, not the Knicks. He can't go to the Knicks. They have nothing to trade. So that makes sense. I want to know from everybody in the comments what team you think would be the best fit for Giannis, or what you think would be the best package, or where you think he ultimately should go if he's leaving. I do think, however, that we kind of need to get into, would the Bucks even make a move like this in the middle of the season? I think if Giannis went and asked for out, they would absolutely move him. I think that's the cachet he has in the organization. And if you know a player like that is unhappy, you're going to move them. He has 3 years and $175.4 million left on his contract, the final of which is a player option in 2027, 2028. That would be his age 33 season. He's making 54.1 million this year. Teams will absolutely trade for that. And you can make the math work. They're a second apron team. They'll take back less money. It's not, I won't say it's easy, but it can be done. When you start to go through whether it would happen in the middle of the year, though, it's just so complicated because of the way teams' rosters are structured, the lack of cap flexibility floating around. If you're going to trade Giannis, you're probably going to want to get out of the tax. The Bucks are like $25 million past that luxury tax line. Not quite that much, but over it. You're not going to shed that much money in one trade in the middle of the year. Again, though, if Giannis asks for a trade, they would grant it to him. And I think a lot of people have since latched on to, and I'll throw it up on screen for anyone watching on YouTube, the quote that he gave to Sam Amick over the summer when he was kind of joking to a Buck staffer or reference to a Buck staffer that, I could be traded if we don't win the championship. So there's that element of this. And there's also this part of the article that's not receiving as much run, but Bill Ryder basically reported that Doc has more power within the organization. Now, the exact quote is, this is from someone familiar with the Bucks' front office. They tell me it's up to Doc now, that they're going to wait 20 games and then see what Doc wants. That would shock me if that were true. And if that's the case, if Doc has that much power after coaching the Bucks to a sub-mediocre record for what amounts to basically half a season in total, um, I want to know what's going on in Milwaukee. Why? What has he done that shows you he has this much power? So I don't buy into the Doc Rivers of it all. At least him, he is not going to be the one that decides whether Giannis gets traded or not. That to me will ultimately be up to Giannis. And personally, while nothing tends to shock me anymore, I would be fairly surprised if Giannis turned around and said, I want out in the middle of this season. That just feels like an offseason matter, which still makes this a big deal if you think that he's going to shake loose, or that after 2 seasons with Damian Lillard and seeing the core around him age and Brook Lopez entering free agency, that Giannis isn't going to feel confident in the future. And so now we get into, well, which teams make sense to trade for Giannis? And for people that don't like trades, we're going to get into more of specific Buck stuff in a little bit. He apparently wants Miami and Brooklyn. Miami's tough. They can trade up to 2 first-round picks right now, and they'll have some swaps. They do have Jaime Jaquez Jr. that they can include. They have Nikola Jovic, Khalil Ware. They have a package, but this is, I don't know. They're not going to be at the top of the line if you're the Bucks. And I think if you're Milwaukee and Giannis gives you a list, okay, you take it in under advisement. But if you're not going to get the best package from that team, you don't send Giannis to that team. If you're moving him with so much time left on his deal, you're already going above and beyond in that regard. You don't owe it to him to send him to these one or two teams. If again one of them doesn't have the best package, I can't imagine Miami will have the best package for Giannis. If they threw Bam on the table, maybe, but I don't know why you're doing that at this point. There's also Brooklyn that Giannis apparently wants to go to. They have a ton of picks now after trading, having traded Kevin Durant, having traded Mikal Bridges. I would be curious to see, is that a route they would go? What's interesting about them is if you don't have to give up your 2025 pick to get him, let's say this happened midseason, offseason, whatever. If you don't have to give up what ends up being a top 5 pick to get him and you decide we're comfortable going with Giannis and this top 5 prospect and then still maybe having some picks left over in the chamber, that is certainly an avenue worth exploring. It's essentially, or especially because you don't control your own pick in 2027, excuse me. But you are going to run in to another issue, which is Milwaukee's going to want back actual players in any deal because they don't control most of their draft future moving forward. And so a team like the Nets, yeah, from a salary perspective, it's easy, and they might have some players that interest Milwaukee. The Bucks are not going to view Cam Johnson as a building block. They're not going to view Nicholas Claxton as a building block in Giannis's absence. And certainly neither of those guys are on an all-star level right now. So that, I don't want to say it rules out the Nets. If you're willing to give up this year's pick and the Bucks know that's a top 5 pick, maybe it definitely makes their package more attractive. I just don't, as the Bucks, you're going to prioritize probably getting it back. Yes, you want draft equity, and of course blue chip prospects, but you might want someone who's just more immediately really good. Because do we know if you're going to trade Dame if Giannis is being moved as well? Maybe he asks her out, but are you trying to float open that window while just restocking some of your asset cupboard? The Nets, I would say, I deem more likely than the Heat, just because if they really went into it, their tippy top offer can include way more draft equity. And I don't think if Miami throws Jaime Jaquez, as I would say is their best blue chip prospect as of right now, I don't think that he would be the difference between, we got this immediate guy and a little bit of draft equity versus the Nets overloaded us with draft equity. And so after that, we've apparently moved beyond Giannis's preferred destinations list. I understand why those would be interesting places to live. I don't view either of those teams as having like a decidedly open-ended window, though. A team that would be interesting, I don't know if they're being mentioned enough in this exercise, is the Pelicans. I don't love the spacing with Zion and Giannis on the floor, but Zion has also made it work with non-spacing fives. He's played with Jonas Valanciunas, but he has some stretch. He's not taking 5 3-pointers per game, and defenses aren't overreacting to him on the perimeter. He's played with Steven Adams. So if you were just going to use those as your two bigs, it could work. They are interesting because if Milwaukee wants to regain control of its own draft, their picks are kind of scattered around right now, and some of them are provisional. They could go to one team or another. But the Pelicans essentially control the Bucks' 2026 and 2027 draft picks for now. If you include those on the table on top of other stuff, maybe some of your own draft picks moving forward, and you can go pretty far out. If you're the Pelicans, you give up some draft equity in the DeJounte Murray trade, but not a ton. And you could also finagle packages around Brandon Ingram. If it's happening mid-season, if this is happening over the offseason, you still have other money. Maybe a Trey Murphy. Is that someone who would interest the Bucks? But the appeal of that trade would be, and especially if it's happening mid-season in Milwaukee, there might be some merit to, okay, we're getting this all-star caliber-ish guy in Brandon Ingram. We're going to have to pay him, but he's not super old. So we're getting him back. We could still be maybe good right away. And then we're also getting back control, essentially, over our next 2 draft picks. What gets interesting about that, though, if you're getting back control over the 26 and 27 drafts, you'd have to write off this year. Again, maybe this trade is happening in the offseason. I would argue it's more likely to happen in the offseason. Do the Bucks want to be good at that point? Would they go the Nets route of we need to be really bad for 2 years and capitalize on this window when we have our draft equity? In which case, getting Brandon Ingram back is not as important. I don't think he's someone who would ruin a rebuilding effort. He probably would pick you up couple extra victories. If you're going to have him and Damian Lillard in tandem, okay, it makes sense for the rest of this half season. You won't control your draft pick this coming summer, but for the next 2 summers, that's when it gets weird. They still would be an interesting team to watch. Another team that just has to be mentioned is the Thunder. They can do everything that Milwaukee wants. They can give them good players. They can give them someone who is both, you can consider him a blue chip prospect, but he's already kind of all-star caliber now. I know he hasn't had the cleanest start to the season so far, but Jalen Williams you could throw in there. I don't think Chet Holmgren to me wouldn't be on the table just because he would be mission critical to making it work, or preserving as much of OKC spacing as possible around Giannis Antetokounmpo. So if you're willing to put Jalen Williams on the table while throwing you got picks on picks on picks from all these different teams, including all of your own picks as well. If you're going multiple firsts on top of Jalen Williams, making the money work gets a little tight. It gets because they don't have a ton of these larger contracts that will make the math work in these situations, but they do have Isaiah Hartenstein. And so if you're going to have Chet Holmgren and Giannis, do you still need Isaiah Hartenstein? That's a very short-term deal. It's effectively a 2+1. There's a team option on year 3. Once his trade restriction lifts in December, you could use him as the primary anchor. And so now you're building things around Isaiah Hartenstein, Jalen Williams, and this could be done over the offseason too. I'm just framing everything out. That's possible. You have Lou Dort's contract, which is $16.5 million this year, goes up to 17.7 next year. That's a number you could work with. You're going to get to a point like an Aaron Wiggins or an Isaiah Joe is an interesting salary matching tool if the Bucks are still trying to be good after all of this. That's a route that you can explore. There are so many different permutations that you can build. I think the primary framework, though, is if you're willing to give up J-Dub, in theory, OKC has enough draft assets to say, hey, here's a bunch of draft assets, some good contracts on good players, and they can keep Jalen Williams, Chet Holmgren, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and get Giannis. I think the Bucks are going to want someone who has all-star potential, if not isn't a present-day all-star as part of any deal when they're not getting back a couple of their own draft picks, pointing back to that New Orleans Pelicans scenario I just outlined. If I'm the Thunder, I honestly don't know if I would trade for Giannis, which is a weird thing to say. I think he's one of the 3 best players in basketball, even with the uneven start to the season. But his contract, he's going to be age 33 at the end of it. I guess you have to do it, but adding him to this defense is just insane, by the way. They might have the best defense of all time. You probably have to do it. It's just Jalen Williams first in salary. That is a lot. And it would really speak to the Thunder acknowledging we might be the best or second best team in the league during the regular season, but we're trying to give ourselves that extra oomph in the playoffs. I just don't know. Yes, Giannis is a play finisher and just going downhill in that spacing can be devastating. Their biggest need really seems to be, okay, high volume, consistent 3-point shooting and someone who can generate their own shots at a high level and efficient level. That's not Giannis. And we're certainly seeing, some of the latter in play with Milwaukee right now. If you're okay, you have to have a conversation about it. That part isn't debatable. If Giannis becomes available, you're going to call, you're going to be involved in some respect. When you go beyond OKC, it gets more interesting just because there are teams with assets. The one I would single out is Houston. They have a bunch of, they could trade their own draft picks. They're going to have this offseason that Jalen Green sizable salary. So if you're Milwaukee saying, all right, we're not getting our own picks back, but if we're getting Jalen Green, another 1 or 2 of Houston's young players and first round picks for Giannis, that you would have to think would interest them. And I would be curious to see, though, if you had to single out which player, if you could have any young player off of Houston, who would you want? And I'm just having the open discussion here, and I'm viewing this more in an offseason lens for Houston. Would the Bucks want Alperen Sengun? Like, if the goal is to be as good as possible, are you just going with who is probably Houston's best player or should be Houston's best player? Or do you go with someone who is maybe more plug and play, boom or bust in Jalen Green, just because you don't have to funnel the entire offense through him? Would you value something like Jalen Green and Amen Thompson over getting just Alperen Sengun? Is Houston willing to give up Amen Thompson if they're getting back Giannis because they're going to have spacing concerns anyway? That's another team where it gets really interesting, where what the defense would be speaks for itself. It would be terrifying. I don't care who Houston gives up, quite frankly. But if you're going to have, 2, let alone 3 of Giannis, Amen Thompson, and Alperen Sengun on the same team, I don't know how that works offensively. There'd be heavy staggering there. I don't love necessarily the fit with all 3 of them on the court if you're trying to get minutes that way. Again, the defense with Giannis and Amen Thompson on the court would be ridiculous. And they still got Tariq in there after all of this. I would assume that one of Amen Thompson or Alperen Sengun would be sent out as part of the deal. And then you have a Cam Whitmore. I mentioned Eason. You have Jabari Smith Jr. So if the Bucks want players over draft equity that can help them now, you've got the ability to satisfy all those needs. I think uh, they might be able, in theory, if the Bucks' goal really is to get a player who is so good right now that they view themselves as having a window, maybe not to contend, but to not be terrible to the point where they're sending out really primetime draft picks while also restocking their own draft pick cupboard. I think Houston has the better trade package than OKC even will. I go back and forth just because OKC has more of I might prefer J Dub over any of the names from Houston I just mentioned. But when you get into just the secondary pieces, it gets a little interesting because I love Isaiah Joe. I really like Lou Dort, Case and Wallace, and OKC. It's comparable for sure. I guess OKC is more attractive if Jalen Williams is on the table because I think he's the single most intriguing player to me, with all due respect to Alperen Şengün of that bunch. But that's probably a separate debate to have. So Houston, OKC feel like teams that could get involved. I think Golden State will certainly try to enter the running, and they have Kuminga, they have Pods, they can give up a couple first round picks. You're still not going to have the best offer for Giannis. It would take a lot of posturing on his part to want to go to the Warriors. It'd be an interesting discussion where if Milwaukee said, "Hey, picks young players, Draymond Green," would you do it? That'd be something. Does Golden State do it? I think part of the appeal is play Draymond with Giannis. That defense becomes generational. But if that's the scenario you're presented with and you're Golden State, do you do it? I feel like you almost have to. And again, it's tough. It's tough to view Milwaukee wanting, or it's tough to think that Milwaukee would want Draymond Green when looking at his own timeline. But if they're just married to making the most of now, while they have these draft picks going out to New Orleans and Portland, I think this year's going to Brooklyn. So could that be feasible? I would say it's feasible. I don't think Golden State is ever going to have the best package though. And it'll be funny that this will be the framing that the front office will probably justify. We didn't make a move to try and maximize this season because we wanted to wait out the Giannis Antetokounmpo sweepstakes, which we knew we were going to have like the fourth or seventh best offer for anyway. After that, I don't really, you could find teams where he might be a super interesting fit. I don't really know where you go. I mean, New York would have been interesting before the Mikal Bridges trade. That's just completely off the table now. I don't think Orlando probably has the assets to get involved here. I don't see not that I don't see the appeal, but if we're talking over the offseason and you have Franz Wagner, you have Jalen Suggs on those new deals, so you could include one of them and then flesh out with draft equity and young players from there. I don't know that I love a core built around either Giannis, Franz, and I mean, that's a hell of a front court if it's Giannis, Franz, and Paulo, or if it's Jalen Suggs, Giannis, and Banchero. So maybe they could talk themselves into going after Giannis. They're just not an organization that tends to take these bigger time risks. San Antonio would be interesting. I think you say at that point, everybody but Wemby is on the table, and the primary, okay, there's draft equity you could give up. You have those Timberwolves picks are interesting. You have a swap with Boston. You have your own first. You have this year Chicago's first that you can give. You have the Sacramento Kings swap that you can include. There's a whole bunch on top of young players. Steph Castle's there, Jeremy Sohan still as well. But I think if you're the Bucks again, and you're prioritizing stocking yourself for the future, but also being competitive now, it kind of begins and ends with Devin Vassell. And so if the Spurs aren't including Devin Vassell, yeah, they could probably cobble together the draft equity necessary to go after Giannis anyway. If the Bucks are prioritizing only young players and draft equity, is Devin Vassell flashy enough as a player to get them over the hump? And just the defense with Wemby and Victor Wembanyama would be absurd. But what does the offense look like at that point? Because the offense is no great shakes right now, and Giannis isn't going to help your spacing. I won't say he'll hurt it, but your spacing is going to be hurt if you're sending out Devin Vassell, who I know is yet to play this season, and then bringing back Giannis. You probably still have to do it just because Giannis and Wemby would be mind melting. Another team that I think stands out, Utah. They just have all these picks, and you have Larry Markkinen and Giannis. It's tough to build a better front court complement to Giannis and Larry Markkinen at this point. You're not playing either one of them at the 5, so maybe that's of a concern. If Taylor Hendricks never gets injured, he would be an interesting trade piece in this discussion, or two, do you just play him and say, okay, we don't have necessarily a center, but Hendricks and Giannis and even Markkinen can all pitch in on that front. But the Jazz have interesting young players, Cody Williams, Keontae George, And then just they have salary matching tools. You look at a Colin Sexton, that would help the Bucks remain competitive. And you could John Collins even. Then you could throw in a ton of draft equity and overload the Bucks with picks. They're another team though, kind of similar in the vein of San Antonio or even Miami. When you're looking at the immediate players, the actual players rather than the draft picks that are going out, do they have enough to satisfy what the Bucks would want? And I honestly just I don't know. And there are other teams that would probably be like, could Detroit really enter the running here? Would Charlotte like to get reckless? Would you include Brandon Miller for Giannis if you're Charlotte with the way LaMelo Ball's playing, and then flush out the package with draft equity from there? That's kind of tough. I mean, Boston has the contracts to get involved if they wanted to. That's a joke. I don't think Atlanta they have some immediate players they could send out that would make it interesting, especially Jalen Johnson if he rebounds off his poor start and you want to include him and Risache and picks. That's an offseason trade, of course. I don't know if they have enough picks to go out to Milwaukee, though, to make that work. Could Chicago do something reckless here? I just don't think they have the draft equity. And would the challenge trade at that point be, okay, we're going to give you Levine, we'll give you Modest Buzelis, any player that you want, and then picks what we have with Zach LaVine. Uh, I guess, like, is that appealing to a Milwaukee team that's going to want to be competitive? Dame and Zach LaVine on the same roster? Probably not. Dallas does not have the juice to get in here. They just don't have the picks. Even if you think that the Bucks would view, they're not going to view Kyrie Irving as and you're not trading Luka. Even if you think the Bucks would view like Derek Lively in that vein, which I just don't think. He's great. I just don't think they would count him as, oh, we're getting kind of a current or future all-star in here. And even if he's an all-star, he's probably not the type of one that you build out your entire team around. That being said, Derek Lively with Dame, but Brook Lopez is still Milwaukee in this situation. Or are we just assuming he's gone? Dallas is too complicated. I don't think. No, Denver can't get in there. I'm just saying, put all your young players. You'll be like, you have no draft picks to trade at the moment. The Bucks would have to love Jamal Murray and or Michael Porter Jr. and or Aaron Gordon for some reason. So that's a no from them. I really think the teams that I would monitor here, and I'm sure the Clippers and the Lakers will get mentioned. These are not teams that have the asset use to get them. I don't think. Even if the Lakers, they have more draft equity available, but Austin Reeves and Dalton Connect and all your picks, and then we're flushing that out with Rui Hachimura, other salary. That's not doing it. Would Memphis trade Jaren Jackson Jr. and would that do it for the Bucks? They would probably consider trading Desmond Bane or Jaren Jackson Jr. for Giannis. Maybe they're a sleeper here. How do you feel about tying your window to Giannis and John Morant? Those guys feel like their athletic primes could be a little bit. Giannis's athletic prime has been pretty long as it is, but Morant's battled availability issues, and how available is he going to be moving forward? How much longer is he going to be this athletic? The same question for Giannis. That'd be a hell of a league pass tandem, though. The teams that I you have to mention Brooklyn and Miami again because Giannis wants to go there. I would just keep my eye on Oklahoma City by default, Houston almost by default, and I really do think New Orleans could get involved here. An interesting challenge trade would be like Embiid for Giannis at this point. Is Philly just like, oh, we're kind of done with the load managing? Do the Bucks want to roll the dice on this? I don't think Paul George. That'd be funny if Paul George gets flipped in a Giannis trade over the offseason or in December. You have Tyrese Maxey, but when the Bucks have Dame, so you do have, if you wanted Giannis, you have picks and you could trade player X, one of your big three with picks to get Giannis. I'm not giving up Maxey just because the idea of him is too important both now and later. I don't know why the Bucks would want, like, if Philly offered all their picks in Paul George for Giannis, would the Bucks do that if Giannis wants? I don't know. And even if it's Embiid, how many picks need to be included in that? I think some people would argue that Philly would have to, like, if you include the Clippers pick and Embiid for Giannis, that would be other moving parts. I'm not looking at salaries right now. That'd be so weird. I honestly think I just disgusted myself even mentioning that. But the primary teams for me would be Houston, OKC, and I would throw New Orleans in there. They don't care about shooting threes or spacing anyway, clearly. So I think those would be the three teams to keep an eye on. Now, to kind of satisfy the more responsible part of this discussion, I don't think that the Bucks should just go into this and say, this is doomed. I don't trust reports. Not that I don't trust. I'm not going to read too much into reports that are just coming from national reporters who, one, don't seem to report this type of stuff all that often. And then two, like, it's not coming from a Buck source. It's coming from teams that want Giannis. go figure that they're going to think that he wants out. That kind of just like sets the fire or tries to set the fire of the rumor mill. But I don't know what leverage you're necessarily trying to gain. I really think it comes down to, does Giannis want out? And if he wants out, the Bucks will move him. We just haven't seen or heard enough to believe that he's going to want out, or that's he's even that close to wanting out. The state of things in Milwaukee aren't great. Giannis has been part of it a little bit. I haven't loved the way he's played so far. That the numbers are gaga. They're always gaga, but more of his baskets are going unassisted. You look at just the number of dribbles he's using on average for his shot attempts. They have gone up. I don't know how much of that is his isolation frequency is through the roof compared to last season. I don't know how much of that is Doc Rivers related. I don't know how much of that is by design. I don't know how much of that has to do with Chris Middleton's absence. And so you're in theory down a creator. But like, I don't want to see him doing as much creation on the, I don't need him to be just a play finisher. I want to make that clear, but his role on offense is far more complicated than it needs to be or should be right now. I don't know who to blame it on. Is it him? Is it the Bucks themselves? And is he been a problem of their transition defense is pretty bad again. Their rebounding has been all over the place too. Teams are just grabbing offensive rebounds off of missed corner threes against them like candy at this point as well. He's part of that a little bit. I haven't had a huge problem with his defense. He's had a couple of just like not great moments. Is he tired from all he's doing on offense? Giannis is still one of the three best players in the league. But I think that you have to, if you're a team interested, you have to have a real conversation. Okay, this dude is going into his 30s. His contract right now takes him through age 33. His next deal that he's going to want in a couple years, that's going to take him into his mid and late 30s. You have to have a real conversation about what you're willing to give up for him. It's not that I'm not spotting regression to where I think that Giannis is worth less today than he was before the start of the season. But that's something to consider in all this as well, is that what is Giannis's level of blame in where the Bucks are heading into their Thursday night matchup against the Boston Celtics? And he deserves some of the blame. Again, I can't imagine. He's Giannis Antetokounmpo. I can't imagine that he doesn't have a huge say over the offense. My biggest takeaway from this is that the league is at least, or people around the league are trying to put pressure on Milwaukee, and they're attempting to read the tea leaves of this situation really is in a level of turmoil. It might be how they feel about even Damian Lillard, where if things don't go, and he's been fine this season, if things don't go according to plan in Milwaukee, how much longer is he going to want to be there? And so they're kind of trying to project 4 or 5 moves ahead here. I say all this fully believing that I don't think Giannis is going to be moved this season. It wouldn't shock me if he's moved before the end of this contract. My bigger, larger point here is the Bucks are not, I don't view them as doomed right now. They're old. They need to be more athletic outside of Giannis Antetokounmpo. It'd be nice to see better moments from Bobby Portis this year. Brook Lopez will start dropping threes more frequently. I'm confident in that. Let's see what they look like when Chris Middleton is ready to rock. They could still be a really good team. I don't know if I see it necessarily defensively is where the concern might lie. I still believe that their core lineups, their 2 or 3 most used lineups should be able to have enough of the Brook Lopez, Giannis Antetokounmpo, even Gary Trent Jr. personnel in it to be better than they have been defensively. And we're seeing a lot of the same issues from last year, at least I think early on, where the things that might stand out are transition. Inconsistent would be the kindest word to put it. They're still just not, defenses are getting behind them too easily after Milwaukee misses a shot. And then ball containment in general at the top, which also plagued them last year. I don't know that they definitely have the talent to fix the first one, because a lot of that is, I'm not going to go the effort route, but a lot of that is just playing smartly and making sure that you're getting back, after you're taking these shots. And look, we see teams, I don't want to say we see teams all the time do this, but if you want to be committed to hitting the offensive glass and getting back in transition, those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. But the Bucks aren't committed to hitting the offensive glass, which is their 29th in offensive rebounding rate, which is why it's inexcusable to me that their transition defense is still as porous as it is, at least in terms of the frequency with which they let opponents get behind them. I don't know how much of their most damning issues are solvable, but I do think this is a way better team than we've seen. And this really does feel like a lot of early season noise more than anything. And I would reiterate that even though we went through the exercise, I think it's newsworthy of the teams that could trade for him. I really would just reiterate that until this comes from someone who's more, until something comes from Giannis himself, or until the rumblings start coming out of the, Shams Charania department or even the athletics department where you're starting to hear those reporters say so, or if Jake Fisher winds up reporting something on it, that's when you know that there might be a 5 alarm fire here. If and when that happens, I really don't think it's going to be the middle of the year. And I think it's going to be Giannis will have to be the one to terminate the relationship, I guess. Kind of similar, the Portland Damian Lillard Wayne game was just painful and the writing was on the wall. The Bucks aren't there, in part because they're not going to have this high lottery pick since they don't control their own draft pick. But I also just think that the bigger thing here is they're going to give it to me. I mean, again, it wouldn't shock me. I guess, I'm never too shocked. It would surprise me if they made a Giannis Antetokounmpo trade this season or if he asked for out this season. The offseason, let's see how this year goes, and then maybe anything can go. But I still have higher hope for the Bucks than they have showed right now. Like, this is we are 4 or 5 games into the season. This is a team that still has plenty of time to right the ship. If shit continues to go sideways, then yeah, that's when we need to dig more into Giannis Antetokounmpo's future. But as of now, I think it's good to know, like, kind of the lay of the land and which teams could be interested, all while acknowledging that, hey, the Bucks can still be better than this, even if you don't view them as the inner circle of contenders, which right now looks like it's Dallas, Cleveland, and Boston, and then kind of like everybody else below them. Hope you enjoyed this. Bonus content, if you've not already, we're out here pumping it. We're pumping out content. It's the middle of the season. I'm still recovering from the flu, so I apologize if my voice or sniffles got in the way of this little bonus episode at all. Until next time, please remember to rate, review, subscribe wherever you consume us, even where you don't consume us. Subscribe across YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. Ratings and reviews on Spotify help a ton, as do comments, likes, turning on post notifications for YouTube. Spread the word. Tell people about us if you have not already. And again, hit the comments and let me know your thoughts on the Giannis situation, or which team you believe has the best Giannis trade package, or what you think Milwaukee's biggest issue is and can they fix it this season, and I will respond as I can. And finally, join our Discord. I will respond there. I'm popping it out in and there, usually a couple of times a day. The link to that's in the podcast and YouTube description. Thanks everyone for the support. As always, and that includes Grant, love you all around these parts. And I leave you with a shout out to the one, the only, the indelible Frank Ntilikina.